Hi everyone, and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And we're at the start of a really interesting article, especially for me, because I love reading about this and writing this article.
Cool.
It's all about detective fiction, detective stories, famous detectives from books and movies and things like that. We're going to look at three very different types of detectives in kind of how they've come over time.
Okay.
Starting from the start and going towards more modern day kind of thing. So there's a lot to get through these few days, so let's get straight into day one and meet our first set of detectives.
Reading. Opening the case files of detective fiction. Detective fiction has been popular for almost 200 years. In that time, there have been countless detectives. Let's meet some and see how the genre has changed. Edgar Allan Poe's short stories about C. Auguste Dupin helped create the genre. When Poe wrote them in the 1840s, the term detective didn't even exist. Dupin uses both logic and imagination to solve his cases. He examines crime scenes in great detail and puts himself in the criminal's place. This method influenced future fictional detectives, in particular Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. In Murders in the Rue Morgue, Poe created the first locked room mystery for Dupin to solve. This is a crime in which it seems impossible for the criminal to have committed it and escaped. Poe also told Dupin's story from the point of view of an ordinary person rather than Dupin himself. This allows the reader to try to solve the mystery as the clues are revealed. Doyle used the same approach by having Dr. Watson, Sherlock Holmes's closest friend, tell the Holmes stories.
So the article begins by saying detective fiction has been popular for almost 200 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, novels themselves haven't been around for more than about, 400 or 500 years. So, yeah, detective fiction, this particular type of story, and it involves a detective. That's the main kind of character. That's what story it is. There's a crime. Who did it? Why did they do it? Can we catch the bad guy? Someone's got to find that out, and that person is the detective, somebody who investigates a crime. Now, this could be like a police detective, somebody on the official force, though many of these stories are about non-police detectives. They kind of amateurs or people who just work outside the normal police force. But whatever they are, they're investigating crimes, they're finding out facts, they're trying to solve these problems and mysteries. For example, in a sentence, we could say, the detective noticed a small fingerprint on the window.
Okay, so kind of they are types of policemen, but they have special training. They're the ones who get the clues and catch the bad guy. They're not the ones you would see writing speeding tickets for people or standing there directing traffic in a police uniform. Detectives usually dress like business people. They usually wear suits and things like that, both in the real world, but of course in fiction. When we talk about fiction, and we're talking about books, we're basically talking about books that are written about made-up people. This is all imaginary. This is not a history book. This is not writing about something true that happened or real people who lived. This is something that was created in the mind and the imagination by the writer, and they make up the story, they make up the people. I mean, they can base it on something in real life. They can take a few basic ideas, but basically, this is a story that the writer has thought up and created from their imagination. This is a fiction novel or a fiction story of some kind.
Right, and detective fiction has been popular, as we said, for 200 years or so. Yep, and in that time, the article says, there have been countless detectives. Now, when we use countless, we're not giving an exact number. We're basically saying there are more than we can easily count. I mean, sure, maybe you could go through all the written works of humans and count how many detectives appeared in these stories.
If you have the time.
You'd need a lot of time. So we can just make it easy on ourselves and say countless. Like we could say there are countless stars in the sky or grains of sand on a particular beach. You could count them with a lot of effort and special equipment, but it's just more than we can easily do. So we say countless, meaning lots.
That's exactly. Or many, many. This is more than lots, more than many. This is a lot of many, basically. A big number, but you're right. The exact number, not really important. So the article continues. Let's meet some and see how the genre has changed. So let's meet some of these famous detectives from fiction, from novels over the years, and see how the genre has changed, the genre of mysteries or detective stories. And genre is a very useful word that we use when talking about art or different styles of art. When I say art, I mean anything that people do that's creative. Now, if we look at something like films or music or writing, there are different styles of film, different styles of music and writing. And those styles and the names we give to them are genres. If we're talking about movies, of course, there are dramas. There are cartoon films or animation films. There are documentaries. There are horror films. There are science fiction films. These are all genres. We use a lot of the same genres when talking about novels. There's thrillers or detective novels like we're learning about today, science fiction novels in space, fantasy novels with wizards and magic and all that kind of stuff. Many other styles too. And of course with music, hip-hop, jazz, rock and roll. These are different genres or styles of music.
So right, we're looking at the genre of detective fiction, and there are lots of what we'd call subgenres within this, different kinds of detective stories. And we're going to go right back to pretty much the start. Certainly in Western literature. We see that Edgar Allan Poe's short stories about C. Auguste Dupin helped create the genre.
Wow, so this is one of the very, very first detective stories with a detective named C. Auguste Dupin. Let's find out more about how this character was created by the author Edgar Allan Poe. When Poe wrote them in the 1840s, the term detective didn't even exist. This wasn't a job. This wasn't a real thing. It was almost like he was writing science fiction at the time, writing about things that aren't in the real world. Of course, in a lot of European and Western countries, the police had only been around for around 100 years, and they didn't have the science like fingerprints and things like that back then. So they didn't really have this job as a detective, so the author even had to invent a title. What does this person who goes out and looks for clues and tries to catch the killer or whoever, what do they do? What is their job? They're a detective. They detect or find answers, find clues to solve mysteries.
Okay, and the way Dupin does this, you're going to find it familiar because a lot of other detectives have gone this way, have copied this idea. The article says Dupin uses both logic and imagination to solve his cases.
Okay, so he's using his mind. He's not using DNA or science or anything like that.
Or just chasing after
or just
criminals.
Running after and shooting bad guys.
Right.
No. Okay.
Logic then. Let's start with using logic. Logic is the ability to think in a clear way. You're using reason. You're thinking of cause and effect. Like, well, if this is true, this must be true, and therefore this must be true. Or this is impossible, this is impossible, this is the only possible answer, no matter how strange it might seem. That is logic, this ability to think in a clear, reasonable, sensible way.
Interesting. To observe and to deduce. Look at the world and then make good decisions or good reasons based on what you see. When logic doesn't work, sometimes a good detective might also have to use their imagination. And your imagination, as we kind of mentioned when talking about fiction and genres, this is your ability to think of new original ideas in your mind. It's that little light bulb that pops above people's heads in cartoons when they get a sudden new brilliant idea that no one has thought of before. Your creativity comes from your imagination, your new ideas, especially for things in the arts, maybe a new idea for a song or a story or a poem. That will all come from your imagination. For example, Dudley must have a great imagination to come up with some of his incredible stories. All right, so how does this Detective Dupin use logic and imagination to find the answer to the mystery?
Well, the article explains he examines crime scenes in great detail and puts himself in the criminal's place.
Oh, okay. Logic and imagination.
And of course, examining the crime scene in great detail. And this was something that hadn't been seen in stories before. This crawling around looking for like, oh, there's a hair here.
Right.
And there's this here and this is missing here. All this kind of stuff. He is examining everything closely, noticing everything. Because to examine something does mean to look at it closely, not just take a quick look, but to really understand all the details. Think about, why is this here? Why is this like this? What exactly am I looking at here? Really understanding and getting all of those details from a very close, detailed look. For example, we could say the doctor used a special tool to examine the inside of Julie's ear. He really wants to see what's going on and why she's having hearing problems.
Okay, and if you want to catch a bad guy, you're going to have to examine all the clues you can find in great detail, meaning basically very, very carefully. A detail of something would be something small that would make this thing a little special or make you able to tell it from other things, okay? The details are the little things that you wouldn't notice when you look at it quickly or don't spend a lot of time, don't examine it. And if you do something in great detail, that just means you're extra careful when you're looking or examining or investigating something. We can do lots of things in great detail. If I told you a story about my trip to Africa and I told you about every single thing I did, I would be telling you this story in great detail, all right, with all the information you could possibly need.
Now, the other thing Dupin does is he puts himself in the criminal's place.
Right.
So that if you put yourself in somebody's place, you imagine you are the other person. You are trying to feel what they feel in order to understand them and their actions. So he thinks, okay, if I was the criminal in this room, what would I do? Where would I try to go? What would my actions be? What would I be noticing and thinking?
Right.
So he can really imagine and think what did happen in this crime scene.
Interesting.
So that's how he does it.
Yeah, by using his imagination. Of course, we can't actually be inside a person or think like that person. But if we use our imagination and go with the things that we know, it is a good way to sort of take us a few steps into thinking what a person would be thinking at that time. And in this case, he's trying to think like the criminal, like the person who did the crime. That's what a criminal is. A person who breaks the law is a criminal. Now, it's a word we might not use for little things. If you park in the wrong place or drive through a red light and get a ticket, I'm not sure someone would say, you're a criminal. But certainly if you break a serious law, if you steal things or hurt someone or have to go to see a judge or go to jail, you probably would be called a criminal at some time because you committed a crime. You broke the law. You did something serious and got in quite a lot of trouble. For example, the criminals dyed their hair and changed their clothes to try to fool the police. Sounds like they robbed a bank and didn't just park in the wrong place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what Dupin does. He goes all over the crime scene in great detail. He imagines himself in the criminal's place.
Okay.
He uses logic, imagination, reason. And you might think, well, don't all detectives do this?
It sounds very similar to other stories I've read.
Exactly, but the reason is Dupin was the first.
Okay,
co-invented this method. And we see this method, so this way of showing a detective and what they do and how they work, this method influenced future fictional detectives In particular, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, of course, and Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. Two very famous fictional detectives. Now, this word fictional is the adjective form of fiction. We mentioned fiction before, it's made up stories. So fictional means it's made up, it's not real. It belongs to the fictional world, not the real one.
I see. So yes, these different ways of solving crimes have been used by lots of fictional detectives in many stories, but in particular, Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot in particular, as it says there. When we use this phrase in particular, we're kind of saying there's lots of things that this might be true about, but these examples, it's a little bit more true. These are really good examples, probably, of what I'm trying to explain or what I'm trying to get you to understand. For example, we could say many cities in Europe are very attractive to tourists, or many tourists go to European cities, Paris and London in particular. They go to Berlin, they go to Rome, but I bet you every year more tourists go to Paris and London than some of those other cities. They're all popular, but some a bit more, Paris and London in particular.
So this wasn't the only way that Poe kind of influenced the detective genre.
Interesting.
We see here in Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is one of the famous stories, Poe created the first locked room mystery for Dupin to solve. Now, we'll explain what a locked room mystery is in just a moment. First, let's look at the word murder. So murder, of course, is one of the crimes we've mentioned. It is an unlawful killing. It's not like when a soldier kills another soldier in war. That can be argued it's not murder, it's war, it's defending a country. A murder is when usually you plan to kill somebody for a particular reason. And so it's one of the big crimes that gets investigated in detective stories. So we could say, for example, the police want to ask George's uncle some questions about a murder that happened 12 years ago. Of course, we can also use murder as a verb. Someone murders someone else. So this Murders in the Rue Morgue is the story, and it is a locked room mystery.
That's right. Most of these detective stories that we're going to be talking about for the next couple of days, they're mysteries, right? What is a mystery? Well, basically a mystery in any situation is just a story or a situation that has no easy answer or explanation. So when we're talking about stories, the mysteries are much more interesting and often involve crime. Someone dies, someone gets killed. Who did it? It's not clear. We didn't see anyone standing there with a gun and run away. This just happened. And so there aren't any easy answers to these stories, and that's what makes them fun to read, because of course the detective has to solve the mystery, as they do in the real world when there's a crime. But as a reader, we can read these mystery stories and also go along with the detective and try to solve the mystery at the same time. Come up with the answer to a sort of confusing or difficult to understand situation. For example, this movie is both science fiction and a thriller. It's a mystery set in space.
Cool.
That's kind of interesting.
What we're talking about here is a locked room mystery.
Okay.
A particular type of story. The article explains this, a locked room mystery, is a crime in which it seems impossible for the criminal to have committed it and escaped. Like, the windows weren't open, the door was locked. How did this happen? That kind of story. And I'm sure you've read or seen on TV those kind of stories where it's just unclear how this could have been done given the circumstances. The room was empty. Nobody came in or out. Nobody saw anything.
So how did this person end up dead?
Exactly. And here we use the verb commit. Commit means to carry out a particular act. It's often used for a crime, commit a murder, commit a theft, commit various other things like that. It kind of shows it's a particular act, sometimes often more serious than just I did it.
Definitely. All right, back to the article. Poe, it says, also told Dupin's story from the point of view of an ordinary person rather than Dupin himself. So this is kind of talking about the style in which Edgar Allan Poe wrote his story. As we read the story, we're not sort of inside Dupin's head saying, I'm Dupin, I went to the house, I looked at the body, I tried to find clues. No, it's not from Dupin's point of view. It's from another person, maybe his assistant or another police officer or someone like that. So it's kind of like us. It's like we're standing there in the room watching Dupin and the other people talk and do things. And so it gives us a bit of a distance from the story, but also allows us in our minds to sort of think, I'm Dupin's assistant. You know, I'll read it along, listen to what he says, and come up with my own ideas rather than just being told what Dupin is thinking, because he might actually think of the reason for
the answer.
He might answer the question early in the story, and then it's not so much fun for us. So rather than that, let's be away from him and watch it all happen. Rather than, this is basically when we're talking about 2 or 3 choices or something. So if one thing is chosen, if it's the one we want to choose or to use and not another thing, especially when you might expect us to choose the other thing, we would say rather than.
And as Mike pointed out, this writing technique allows the reader to try to solve the mystery as the clues are revealed.
Interesting.
Dupin probably figured it out very quickly.
Okay.
But the assistant has to wait as it slowly comes out.
I see.
And that because we read the assistant's thoughts, we can try to do the same, not just have the answer. And this is not the only time this technique has been used in a detective story.
Exactly. Doyle used the same approach. That's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used the same approach by having Dr. Watson, Sherlock Holmes's closest friend, tell the Holmes stories. It's true, when you read the Holmes stories, it's not Holmes talking, it's Dr. Watson saying, he did this, I went with him, we solved the crime. So it gives you the chance to sort of be the assistant or be Holmes or be Watson and watch Holmes work his detective magic.
Also makes the detective seem very clever indeed.
It does, for sure.
All right, well, that is the end of the first part of this article. We've got a few other detectives to cover on our other days, but right now let's go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
Okay, so our For You Chat question, have you read any detective fiction? Which stories do you enjoy?
Good question. Well, I've read some Agatha Christie that we've mentioned there. Of course, Sherlock Holmes is a personal favorite. I almost always have a book of his stories next to my bed. They're fun to read. Another one I kind of like, I don't know how famous she is, Ellis Peters was this woman's name.
No, I don't know.
And she wrote some stories about a monk back in the Middle Ages.
Oh.
And he used to solve mysteries around the town of Shrewsbury.
Cadfael.
That's right.
Yes.
Brother Cadfael. And I kind of like them because they had a bit of history. There was a little bit of the, also the sort of mystery and the darkness of that time, hundreds of years ago. And he's also solving, murders and mysteries. And
have you read The Name of the Rose, Umberto Eco? That's like a monk detective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Yeah, I love detective stories. I've read all the Holmes ones. I've read quite a lot of, a few of the Poirot stories. I've read the Dupin stories. Yep. So, yeah, I do like detective fiction, and I'll take anything. So I love a good mystery.
Cool.
Tomorrow we're going to explore a different kind of detective and a different kind of mystery completely, though. So join us for that tomorrow. Bye for now. Bye.
Take care.
Vocabulary Review.
Detective. The woman hired a detective to follow her husband and find out if he had a girlfriend. Imagination. The characters in this book are purely from the author's imagination and are not based on real people. Examine. The doctor examined George's skin carefully to find out which medicine to give him. Criminal. You must get a background check to prove you're not a criminal before you can do this job. Murder. No one wanted to buy the house after a murder took place there. They thought it would be bad luck. Mystery. The exact place where people buried the treasure on the island remains a mystery.
智慧小补帖
Fiction. Genre. Logic. Commit.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net